After my husband died, my in-laws tried to take our house. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. 3 days after I buried my husband, my mother-in-law asked for my house keys. Judith set it in my kitchen, holding a mug I hadn't offered her, like she was asking for a casserole dish instead of the front door to the only home I had left. The dishwasher hummed. White lilies from the funeral were already turning sweet and rotten in the warm room. Daniel used to joke that our kitchen was the heart of the house because every hard conversation ended there. He'd lean against the counter, arms crossed, patient and solid, making everything feel survivable. Now he was gone, and his mother was looking at me like I was temporary. "I'm sorry," I asked, because grief had made everything half a second slower. Judith set the mug down on a coaster Daniel bought at a farmer's market last summer. "The keys, Claire. Mark needs access. We have to start sorting Daniel's things. It's only practical." Mark stood behind her near the back door, eyes moving around the room like he was taking inventory. The framed photo from our first camping trip. Daniel's boots by the mat. My purse on the chair. His expression said none of it belonged to me for long. I still had funeral makeup dried into the corners of my eyes. My black dress was hanging over the banister because I hadn't had the energy to carry it upstairs. The casserole dishes stacked on the counter felt like proof that other people believed loss had an expiration date. "This is my house," I said, but even to me it sounded weak. Judith tilted her head with practiced sadness. It was Daniel's house, and Daniel was our family. That was the first moment I understood grief was not going to be the only thing trying to swallow me. Daniel and I had spent 7 years building this place from thrift store furniture, paint-stained weekends, and one terrifying mortgage. Every floorboard held the shape of our life. If I lost this house, I wasn't just losing property. I was losing the last place where my marriage still felt physically real. Mark took a step toward the key bowl by the door. Then he said something that made the whole room turn cold. Before Daniel died, our life looked ordinary in the most beautiful way. He woke up earlier than I did and always forgot to close the cereal box. He left coffee rings on the counter even though I bought him coasters every Christmas as a joke. He could not fold a fitted sheet, so he would ball it up and call it advanced engineering. I used to listen from the hallway while he talked to the dog next door through the fence as he watered our tomato plants. That house was our first big act of faith. We bought it 6 years into our marriage, a 2-bedroom place in a quiet suburb with crooked shutters, tired siding, and a maple tree in front that dropped helicopters all over the walkway. The listing photos were awful. The carpet smelled faintly like dust and old perfume. Daniel walked through the empty living room, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "We can make this ours." That sentence became our private religion. We painted the bedroom gray after a 4-hour argument about undertones. We learned drywall repair from videos and nearly flooded the bathroom, replacing a faucet. On our first Christmas there, we had no money left after closing costs, so we strung popcorn and cranberries and sat on the floor drinking cheap wine out of coffee mugs. Daniel looked around at the bare room and said, "Still feels rich to me." Judith never spoke about the house that way. To her, it was Daniel's place from the day we closed, even though both our names were on everything that mattered. When she visited, she ran a finger over the mantel and commented on dust no one else could see. She once asked whether we had considered keeping certain furniture in the bloodline. Mark was blunter. He treated the garage like his storage unit and once joked, "If Danny ever gets tired of suburban married life, I'll take this place off his hands." Daniel answered without smiling, "You'd have to ask Claire, since it's hers too." The last family dinner before Daniel got sick was at Judith's house. White tablecloth, candles. Then she said, "I do hope the house stays with us, whatever happens in life. Homes like that should remain in the family." Daniel put his fork down. "Claire is my family." Judith smiled, but her eyes went flat. I understood that look only after he was gone. Funeral week moved like I was underwater and everyone else was standing safely on shore, shouting instructions I couldn't quite hear. There were lilies everywhere. Aluminum trays of baked pasta. Cards with blue flowers and sentences about peace that made me angry because there was nothing peaceful about watching a man you loved disappear in a hospital bed. Daniel died on a Thursday. By Friday, I was choosing music, meeting with the funeral home, signing forms with a hand that shook hard enough to make my signature look forged. People praised me for being strong because I wore matching shoes and remembered to thank them. What they didn't see was me standing in the laundry room at 2 in the morning with Daniel's sweatshirt pressed to my face so I could still smell detergent and cedar soap. They didn't see me staring at our bed, unable to lie in the middle because his side felt occupied by a shape my body still recognized. The funeral passed in fragments. Judith's immaculate black suit. Mark gripping people's shoulders too hard. The closed casket because I couldn't bear the alternative. Nina sitting beside me, wordless and steady, her hand warm around mine every time a new person leaned in with pity in their eyes. The pastor calling Daniel devoted, generous, loyal. That part hurt because it was true. Afterward, people gathered at the house. Shoes lined up by the entry. The dining table crowded with paper plates. Voices kept dropping when I entered a room, then rising again when I passed. Judith moved through the kitchen, accepting condolences like a hostess. She thanked people for coming for Daniel's family. And every time she said it, something in me flinched. I was carrying a tray of untouched cookies back toward the counter when I heard Mark in the mudroom, talking low to Judith. "She can't stay here long," he said. Judith answered, "Not if she has any decency." I froze so fast I nearly dropped the tray. Nina looked up from the sink and saw my face change. Later, when most people were gone and the house had that exhausted silence that comes after too many voices, Judith stood beside the fireplace and looked at our wedding photo like it offended her. Then she made the comment that told me this wasn't grief talking at all. Judith waited until Nina stepped outside to take a call before she cornered me. Mark hovered near the hall table, pretending to straighten sympathy cards while listening to every word. The last guests had finally left. The house was dim except for the lamp by the couch and the light above the stove, and for one stupid second I thought maybe Judith was about to say something kind. Instead she said, "I know this is difficult, but we should discuss your timeline." "My what?" "For moving out," she said, as calmly as if we were scheduling carpet cleaning. I laughed once because my brain genuinely refused to process it. "You cannot be serious." Judith gave me the same patient look nurses had used on Daniel when he got angry during treatment. "Claire, this house was in Daniel's family. It was in Daniel's and my name's. Paperwork can be interpreted," Mark cut in, "especially after a death." The room sharpened around me. "Are you threatening me in my own house?" Judith sighed. "No one is threatening you. We're trying to prevent ugliness. Daniel would have wanted his home protected." "From me." She didn't answer directly. "You're young. You can start over somewhere smaller. Rent for a while. Be practical." Be practical. Like grief was a budget adjustment. Like 7 years of marriage could be packed into boxes and transferred to a one-bedroom apartment. I said Daniel had never once implied I didn't belong here. Judith pressed her lips together and said, "Daniel was sentimental. He also felt responsible for everyone." It landed like she was telling me he had made a charitable mistake. Nina came back inside just as Mark took a folder from the hall table. He tapped it against his palm and said, "You should gather what's yours before things get complicated." Nina looked from him to me. "What things?" "Family matters," Judith said. Nina stepped closer to my side. "Claire is family." Judith's smile was thin. "That remains to be seen." Then someone knocked at the front door. Mark opened it, and a man in a wrinkled jacket asked for Daniel by full name. He held a manila envelope and looked embarrassed. "Delivery for the estate," he said. That was how I learned the whispers of debt were already at my door. Once people smell conflict after a death, they arrange themselves around it with incredible speed. Some drift closer for a better view. Some back away so they won't be asked to choose. In the weeks after the funeral, I learned who in Daniel's family preferred comfort over truth. Judith called twice a day, always sounding wounded and reasonable. She left voicemails saying things like, "I know emotions are high," and "We only want what's fair," in that polished tone that made cruelty sound like etiquette. Mark texted less carefully. "Need access to the garage. Don't donate anything yet. Mom says you should start packing Daniel's office." He never asked how I was sleeping. He never asked whether I'd eaten. I stopped answering both of them unless I had to. But silence didn't protect me from doubt. Daniel handled paperwork because he liked order, and I handled the house because I liked reality. I knew where the batteries were, when the gutters had last been cleaned, what color paint we used in the guest room. He knew passwords, policy numbers, where every scanned document lived in the cloud. Now I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to list everything I knew and everything I only thought I knew. And those two columns were terrifyingly different. Did Daniel tell Judith something during treatment he never told me? Did he think I'd sell? Did he leave some old promise hanging out there because he hated conflict and wanted to keep his mother calm? Grief made every memory slippery. Nina came over most evenings with groceries I didn't ask for. She watched me sort mail into shaky piles and finally said, "You're acting like maybe they have a point. I don't know what Daniel signed. I don't know what's in probate. I don't know anything." "You know Judith is circling like a vulture in pearls," she said. "That seems relevant." I laughed harder than I had since the hospital, and then I cried so suddenly it scared me. Nina sat across from me and waited it out. When I told her maybe Daniel had promised them the house, she shook her head. "If he did, why are they pushing this hard before you can breathe?" That question lodged in me like a splinter. The next morning, something missing from the mail stack made Nina's question dangerous. Daniel and I had a mail system that looked chaotic to everyone else and made perfect sense to us. Bills on the left corner of the counter. Personal mail in the wooden tray by the fruit bowl. Urgent documents clipped with the blue binder clip that somehow migrated around the kitchen. The morning I noticed the missing envelope, I was standing barefoot in one of Daniel's old t-shirts, sorting through condolence cards and medical bills that still arrived, as if he might open them. A county envelope addressed to both of us had been on top when I brought the stack in from the porch the night before. Thick paper. Official seal. I remembered because I almost opened it immediately, then didn't because Mark was outside helping with folding chairs from the funeral, and I suddenly didn't want him seeing any more of my life. I had set the envelope in the tray. By morning, it was gone. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I had moved it upstairs. Maybe it slid under a cookbook. Maybe lack of sleep had made me hallucinate county stationery. I checked the tray, the counter, the junk drawer, the office, even the recycling bin. Nothing. Then my phone lit up with a voicemail from Mark. "Hey," he said too casually. "Probate stuff gets confusing, so if you find any county records or title notices, let me know before you sign anything wrong. Mom's worried you'll get taken advantage of." I replayed it 3 times. He never used phrases like title notices. The message wasn't concern. It was fishing. That afternoon, I drove to Judith's house, telling myself I was only returning a casserole dish left in my trunk. But when I walked toward the side entrance, I heard voices through the partly open mudroom window. Mark said, "If the transfer isn't recorded yet, we can still argue intent." Judith answered, "Then find the papers before she does." I stood there with a Pyrex dish in my hands and felt something inside me lock into place. On the drive home, my hands shook so badly I had to pull into a gas station parking lot. I listened to Mark's voicemail again, and for the first time since Daniel died, one clear thought rose above the noise. They were afraid of documents, which meant the documents weren't on their side. The next morning, I started with the county records office because it felt solid, fluorescent, factual, the opposite of everything happening inside my head. Nina took an early lunch and met me there with coffee and a legal pad. The woman at the counter wore half-moon glasses and asked for the property address. My voice shook when I gave it. Hers didn't. She typed, clicked, printed, slid papers toward me. Deed history, mortgage record, transfer affidavit. Both our names were there in black and white. Daniel Mercer and Claire Mercer, joint tenants with right of survivorship, recorded 6 years earlier, book and page numbers stamped at the bottom. It meant the house passed to me automatically when he died. No gray area. Just law. I stared so long the clerk finally asked, "Do you need a certified copy?" "Yes," Nina answered before I could. I bought 3. Back in the parking lot, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe properly for a minute. Not because I was confused anymore, but because certainty came with its own heartbreak. Judith and Mark hadn't been mistaken. They had been lying. Deliberately. While I was planning a funeral, Nina took the papers from my hands and read every line. "Okay," she said. "Now we figure out why they're desperate." We stopped at the bank next because one of the estate notices mentioned a home equity line I didn't recognize. The manager couldn't discuss Daniel's personal accounts without more paperwork, but she confirmed something small and devastating. No lien had been filed against my house. The process server envelope from funeral night had been about a business guarantee tied to Daniel's late father's old company, not the property itself. Judith and Mark had known that too, or could have known it with one phone call. Back at home, I logged into Daniel's cloud storage using the emergency password sheet we had once made as a joke after locking ourselves out of 3 accounts on vacation. His folders were exactly as he kept everything in life. Neat, dated, labeled. Under House, there was a PDF titled owner_docs_final. Inside it was the deed, the closing disclosure, and a scanned letter with Daniel's signature at the bottom. The first line made my blood go cold. The letter was dated 11 months before Daniel died, back when we still talked about treatment in the language of optimism. It was addressed to an attorney named Helen Brooks. The subject line read, "Home ownership confirmation and limitation of third-party access." Daniel had written it after one of Judith's visits, the one where she wandered through our bedroom commenting on family pieces and asking whether we kept original closing documents in the house. In the letter, Daniel stated plainly that the house belonged jointly to him and me, and that upon his death, ownership would transfer fully to me. He also noted that no key, code, or access rights were to be granted to Judith or Mark without my consent. He included a sentence that felt like Daniel speaking from the page. My wife should not be burdened by preventable confusion during any medical or estate emergency. I sat there at his desk, equal parts grateful and furious. He had known there might be a problem. He had tried to make it easy on me. Nina read the letter over my shoulder and whispered, "Claire." I kept scrolling. There were utility bills, contractor receipts, appliance warranties, and then a screenshot Daniel had saved from a text exchange with Mark. "Mark, if anything happens, Mom says house comes back to us." "Daniel, that's not how marriage works." "Mark, it's a family asset." "Daniel, no, it's my home with my wife." "Drop it." That should have been enough, but there was more. In Daniel's email, I searched Judith's name and found a chain he had forwarded to himself, probably as documentation. One email from Judith mentioned the refinancing deadline and said, "We cannot lose my house as well." Another from Mark said, "If Claire sells quickly after the funeral, we can settle First Harbor and keep this quiet." My stomach dropped. This was not about sentiment. Judith's own house was in trouble, and Mark had debts with First Harbor Collections. They wanted my home because they needed money fast, and they thought widowhood would make me pliable. Then my doorbell rang, and through the frosted glass, I saw Mark's outline on the porch. I didn't answer the door right away. I stood in the hallway with Daniel's printed letter in one hand and my phone in the other, staring at Mark's shape through the glass. He rang once, then again, then knocked with the flat confidence of someone who had never heard the word no enough times in his life. Nina mouthed, "Don't open it," from the kitchen. I should have listened. Instead, I cracked the door with the chain still on. Mark's eyes flicked past me immediately, scanning the entryway. "We need to talk." "No, you need to leave." He laughed once. "Mom's trying to do this with dignity. Don't make it uglier than it has to be." "What exactly is it?" He leaned closer. Daniel had obligations. So does a thief, probably. That hit. His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then help me understand why you were discussing title records outside Judith's mudroom." For a second, surprise broke through his expression. Not guilt, just annoyance that I had become inconvenient. He changed tactics fast. "Claire, Mom is in a bad spot. Daniel always helped. You know that." I didn't know Daniel helped them. Rides to appointments, fixing a disposal, quietly covering a utility bill once. What I didn't know was the scale, the desperation, the assumption that his care had been an inheritance strategy. "Did he promise you my house?" I asked. Mark didn't answer directly. He understood responsibility. I shut the door. My hands were shaking, but something important had shifted. I no longer felt crazy. I felt hunted, which was cleaner, easier to act inside. I spent the afternoon building a folder on my laptop labeled House Timeline. I saved the deed, Daniel's letter, Mark's text, the emails about refinancing, voicemail audio, and photos of every room in case someone tried to claim I'd hidden or removed property. I wrote down dates, funeral, process server, missing county envelope, Mark's voicemail. Then, while searching one last drawer in his desk for the original deed, I found an envelope taped beneath the bottom shelf. The envelope carried 5 handwritten words, and suddenly I understood everything. I sat on the floor to open the envelope because my knees gave out before I could make it to the chair. Inside were 2 pages folded around a spare house key and a business card for Helen Brooks, estate and property attorney. Daniel's handwriting slanted harder than usual, like he'd written fast. Claire, if you're reading this, it means I waited too long to have a conversation I hated. That one line wrecked me more than the funeral had. It was so him to frame cowardice as scheduling. He explained that after his father died, Judith refinanced her house twice to keep up appearances she could no longer afford. Mark had been between opportunities for years, which in Mercer family language meant unemployed with expensive taste. Daniel had paid off one of Mark's credit card settlements 3 years earlier on the condition it never happened again. It happened again. Then came a private lender, then collection threats, then pressure from Judith to protect family assets by persuading us to put the house in a trust she controlled. Daniel refused. He wrote that Judith believed blood outranked marriage and that Mark believed paperwork only mattered when it favored him. At the end of the second page, Daniel wrote, I contacted Helen because I wanted everything clear if my treatment failed. I also changed the backdoor code after Mom used her old one without telling us. I'm sorry I didn't tell you more. I kept hoping love would make me wrong about them. Nina cried when she read it too. That night Judith invited me to a family dinner to clear up misunderstandings. The message came with a smiley face that made my skin crawl. Nina wanted me to ignore it. I almost did. Then I imagined Judith telling the extended family her version first, painting me unstable and selfish. So I went. Judith set the table with linen napkins and lit candles like she was staging innocence. Mark poured wine and acted bored. Halfway through the meal, Judith reached across the table, touched my wrist, and said, Sweetheart, if you cooperate, we can make sure you're provided for. I looked at her hand on my skin and understood politeness was the trap. Then Mark said the one thing Daniel had warned me they might try. If this gets formal, Mark said, swirling red wine he hadn't earned, the court will ask what Daniel intended, not what you feel entitled to. Judith gave him a soft, reproving glance that was obviously theater. Mark, but she didn't correct him. She wanted the threat delivered. I set my fork down very carefully. Daniel intended for me to live in my home. Judith dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. People say many things when they're sick. That sentence did something final inside me. She wasn't just trying to take the house anymore. She was trying to revise my marriage using my dead husband as a witness who couldn't object. I stood up. Don't ever say that again. Mark leaned back in his chair. You're emotional. My husband died. And now real decisions have to be made. I left before I threw the wine in his face. In the driveway, under Judith's polished porch light, I called Helen Brooks. It was after 8, and I expected voicemail. Instead, a calm voice answered on the second ring. I gave my name. There was a pause, papers moving. Then she said, Daniel told me you might need to call. The steadiness of that nearly undid me. I met Helen the next day in an office that smelled faintly like toner and lemon polish. She read every document without interruption, asked precise questions, and never once spoke to me like grief made me unreliable. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, Claire, the property is yours. Very clearly. But clarity doesn't stop harassment. It just gives us tools. She helped me draft a cease and desist letter regarding unauthorized entry, document removal, and false claims about ownership. She also advised cameras, code changes, and a written inventory of Daniel's personal effects. I left her office feeling something unfamiliar, protected. That lasted 4 days. On Sunday afternoon, I came back from the grocery store and found Mark's truck in my driveway, Judith's sedan behind it, and my front door propped open. 2 cardboard boxes sat on the porch, both filled with my things from the bedroom. Mark was inside my house when I heard the upstairs closet door slam. I don't remember dropping the grocery bags, but I remember tomatoes rolling across the porch boards and splitting open against the steps. I remember the sound more than anything. One ripe, wet burst after another while my brain struggled to catch up to the fact that Mark was in my bedroom. I ran inside. Get out. Judith stood in the foyer holding a legal envelope like it was a holy object. Claire, calm down. We're preserving family property. By breaking into my house. Mark came down the stairs carrying one of Daniel's watch boxes. This belonged to Dad, he said. You don't get to keep everything. I took out my phone and hit record so fast my thumb slipped. Say that again. He froze. Judith recovered first. Put that away. You're creating hysteria. No, I said, angling the camera toward the open front door, the boxes on the porch, Mark in my hallway. You did. Judith lifted the envelope. Our attorney says there are questions around estate distribution. Helen had warned me about fake pressure dressed as legal certainty. I asked to see the letter. Judith refused. That told me enough. I called the police while looking directly at her. The change in her face was instant. Mark started yelling about disrespect. Judith hissed my name like I had slapped her. I kept filming. By the time the officers arrived, Mark had put the watch box down, but not back where it belonged. One officer took statements while the other walked through the house with me. Upstairs, dresser drawers had been opened. The closet door hung crooked. The small fireproof document safe in Daniel's office had scratch marks near the lock. I showed them Helen's cease and desist letter. I showed them the deed. I showed them Daniel's note. The officer's mouth tightened. Judith switched tactics on the sidewalk. Tears. Trembling voice. We're grieving too. I believe that, in a way, grief and greed can live in the same person. But only one of those had pried open my front door. After they left, Helen called it what it was: attempted unlawful entry, possible theft, documented harassment. Then she said, very calmly, I think it's time we stop reacting and start setting the stage. The next move she proposed was so precise it made Judith's whole strategy look childish. Helen requested a formal meeting at her office to clarify any misunderstandings regarding estate and property interests. She copied Judith, Mark, and the attorney whose name appeared on the vague letter Judith had waved in my foyer. The response came back within an hour from a paralegal, not the attorney himself, stating that the firm did not represent either Judith or Mark in any claim involving my home. Helen smiled without warmth when she printed that email. Good, she said. That helps. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10. Nina came with me because by then she understood silence could be weaponized. Judith arrived in cream wool and pearls, looking like a widow in a tasteful brochure. Mark showed up late, angry before he sat down. Helen waited until everyone had water in front of them, then turned on the wall monitor. Before we begin, she said, I'd like to establish a few uncontested facts. One by one, she put them on the screen. The certified deed showing joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Daniel's signed instruction letter limiting third-party access. The email chain about Judith's refinancing deadline. Mark's text claiming the house was a family asset. My video from the unlawful entry, clear enough to hear Mark say, I didn't get to keep everything. Then the kicker. County records showing Judith's property had a notice of default filed 6 weeks before Daniel died, and court records showing Mark was being sued over a failed contracting business. Judith went white first, then pink with fury. You had no right. Helen interrupted. Public records require no one's permission. Mark slammed a palm on the table. This is disgusting. I finally spoke. You tried to scare me out of my home before Daniel's flowers were dead. Judith turned to me with tears gathering on command. We were desperate. There it was. Not remorse. Not confusion. Desperation weaponized into entitlement. Helen slid a document across the table. Here are the terms. You will cease contact except through counsel, return any removed documents, and confirm in writing that you make no ownership claim regarding the Mercer residence. Mark laughed, but it cracked in the middle. Then Judith said something so revealing even he stopped talking. She looked at me, not Helen, not the documents, just me, and said, he owed us. Not we misunderstood. Not we panicked. Owed. I thought about Daniel driving to Judith's house after 10-hour workdays because her sink was leaking again. Daniel paying for Mark's hotel room once when he got thrown out by a girlfriend and swore he'd get back on his feet. Daniel sitting in chemo, still asking whether his mother had enough help getting groceries. I thought about how love had been interpreted as debt in that family, how generosity had been entered into some invisible ledger and used to justify theft the second he could no longer speak for himself. No, I said. He loved you. That is not the same thing. For once, Judith had no graceful answer. Her face just collapsed into age, bitterness, and humiliation. Mark muttered that this was all my doing, which was almost funny, as if the facts had assembled themselves out of spite. As if I had forged their emails, staged their break-in, recorded his voice while grieving in my kitchen. They signed nothing that day, but leaving without signing turned out to matter less than they thought. Helen filed for a protective order based on the documented entry and harassment. The police report helped. So did my video. So did the paralegal email disclaiming representation. Within 2 weeks, Judith's attorney, an actual one this time, contacted Helen to negotiate terms. The final agreement barred them from entering my property or making false ownership claims, required return of 2 missing document folders, and directed all communication through counsel. Extended family reacted in predictable clusters. A cousin called to apologize for not wanting to get involved earlier. An aunt sent a text about how grief makes people act strangely, as if strange behavior naturally included attempted property theft. A few people went quiet altogether. I let them. The biggest surprise was how tired Victory felt. There was no triumphant rush, just quiet. A safer kind of quiet than before, but still heavy. Then Judith sent me something I never expected to see again. I stood at the kitchen counter for 5 full minutes before opening Judith's package. Part of me expected one last trick. A fake notice, another threat, a final attempt to slide poison through a crack she no longer controlled. Inside was only Daniel's old brass house key and a folded note in Judith's precise handwriting. No apology. Of course not. Just this. I found this in Mark's desk. It belongs to the house. For a second, I hated her all over again, because even then she couldn't say it belonged to me. But by then hate had become too expensive to keep paying. I set the note aside, carried the key to the little ceramic bowl by the door, and let it rest there with the others. Healing was not dramatic. It looked like changing the locks and planting herbs in the raised bed Daniel built from warped cedar planks. It looked like finally washing the black funeral dress and putting it in the back of the closet instead of on the banister. It looked like meeting Nina on the porch with coffee on Saturdays and talking about ordinary neighborhood things without every conversation curving back toward court dates and grief. It looked like sitting with Helen one last time to update my own documents so no one could ever use confusion as a crowbar again. A month later, I repainted Daniel's office. Not because I wanted to erase him, but because I wanted to choose what stayed. I kept his drafting lamp, the ridiculous mug that said "World's Okayest Gardener," the photo of us on the floor our first Christmas in the house, drinking cheap wine from coffee mugs because we had no furniture yet. I framed one line from his letter to Helen in my own handwriting. My wife should not be burdened by preventable confusion. That sentence became a different kind of religion. So this is what I tell anyone who loses someone and suddenly finds kindness turning transactional. Grief does not cancel your rights, and family is not entitled to your surrender. Get copies. Save voicemails. Learn what your name is on. The people who pressure you to decide quickly are usually afraid of what patience will uncover.